I once saw a woman work 12 hours straight without eating a single bite of food. People thought she was careless. Some mocked her, others whispered behind her back. They said she was too proud to take a break, too poor to buy food, or too foolish to know better. But what they didn't know was that in the back of a dark storage room, hidden between mops and broken boxes, her baby was waiting. When her shift ended and the others went home, she slipped quietly into that room. I followed, not knowing why, only that something in me told me there was more to her story. And that's when I heard it, the soft cry of a child. There, in a makeshift cradle of blankets, lay a baby girl. The woman knelt beside her, pulling out the sandwich she had hidden all day. She hadn't saved it for herself. She had saved it for the child. Every bite she refused, every sip of water she skipped, was so that little girl never went hungry. I remember the way she stroked the baby's cheek, her face tired but glowing with a love so fierce it humbled me. She wasn't careless. She wasn't weak. She was stronger than anyone in that building, stronger than all the whispers that circled her. I didn't know her name then. To the world, she was invisible, just another cleaning woman. But to that child, she was everything. And if I told you this story ended with a millionaire's wedding, you'd never believe me. But life has a way of writing stories stranger than fiction. Stories where sacrifice turns into hope, where hunger becomes love, and where one skipped lunch can change everything. So sit with me now, let me tell you about her. Because what began in silence, in a forgotten storage room, would one day become the moment that shocked us all. Jessica Harris's earliest memories were not of toys or birthday cakes or bright summer vacations. They were of her mother's hands, rough from work, cracked by cold water and cheap soap, yet always gentle when they brushed hair from her daughter's face. Those hands told the story of Jessica's childhood more clearly than any diary ever could. They were the hands of survival. She was born into modest means, in a neighborhood where paint peeled from wooden porches, and where the sound of sirens mixed with the laughter of children playing stickball in the streets. Life there was not unbearable, but it was thin, stretched taut across the demands of bills, groceries, and repairs that always cost more than they should. It was a place where dignity often had to be chosen deliberately, like a cloak you put on in the morning, despite the holes underneath. Her mother, Clara, worked as a seamstress in a garment factory. The irony was cruel. Each day, Clara handled silk and velvet, stitching gowns that would one day hang in shop windows. Jessica was too shy to even gaze at. She worked on dresses destined for parties and galas, dresses that would brush the floors of homes far away from theirs. Yet at night, Clara returned to their tiny apartment and wore the same faded dress she had mended a dozen times. Still, Clara held herself with a grace that no poverty could erase. She stood tall, her back straight, her head high, and she told Jessica something she would never forget. People will judge you, my girl. They'll see your shoes, your clothes, and they'll think they know your worth. But worth isn't what they see. Worth is what you carry inside, and whether you let the world break it. Jessica learned early to believe her mother's words. There were days she went to school with a lunch that was nothing more than bread and margarine. Days when she wore the same sweater 3 times a week, because it was the only one warm enough for winter. Days when she listened to other children talk about Christmas toys, while she pretended excitement for a holiday she knew would bring nothing more than a small, practical gift, socks perhaps, or notebooks for school. And yet, she never felt unloved. Poor, yes, sometimes ashamed, yes, but never unloved. Her mother gave her something hunger and cold could never take: tenderness. At night, when the furnace sputtered and died, Clara would wrap her in quilts and hum lullabies until sleep softened the ache of the day. Jessica would press her cheek against her mother's chest and listen to the steady rhythm of her heart, a sound that made her feel safe even when the world felt fragile. But poverty leaves marks, invisible yet deep. Jessica grew up watching how it bent her mother's shoulders, how it carved tired lines around her mouth. She saw how Clara sometimes pushed away a plate at dinner, claiming she wasn't hungry, even though Jessica's young eyes noticed the hollowness in her cheeks. She learned the unspoken rules of survival: never complain, never waste, never let pride die no matter how heavy the burden. Her world was small, but it taught her much. She saw how neighbors whispered when someone fell behind on rent, how shame clung to those who went to the charity line for bread. She saw children mocked for shoes with holes, their laughter cut short by cruelty. From these things, she made a vow. One day, her life would be different. One day, she would create a home where love wasn't constantly strained by lack, where the cupboards were full and the roof never leaked, where children didn't learn shame before they learned confidence. But her earliest life was not defined only by her mother's strength. It was also defined by the absence of another figure, her father. Jessica's father left when she was just 4. She remembered his boots by the door, the smell of tobacco on his jacket, the way his voice always seemed like thunder when he argued with Clara. And then one morning, in the rain, he walked out and never came back. The image stayed in her mind: the slam of the door, her mother's trembling breath, the sound of her own cries echoing in the small apartment. She did not know then what abandonment meant, not in the language of adults, but she felt it in her bones. It was the first shadow that entered her life, a shadow that whispered even in moments of joy, "People can leave." Her mother never spoke ill of him, never spat bitterness into her daughter's ears, but silence itself became its own teacher. From silence, Jessica learned that love could vanish. From silence, she learned to fear the fragility of promises. From silence, she learned to cling tightly to anyone who stayed. And yet, even in that loss, Clara never let despair set the tone of their lives. She filled the gaps with resilience. She made Jessica believe they could manage, that life could be endured with dignity, that strength was not measured by what you had, but by what you carried forward in spite of what you lacked. Jessica grew up in that crucible of scarcity and strength, love and absence. And though she was still only a child, she began to understand the truth her life was teaching her, that hardship can shape you, but it does not have to define you. When Clara worked late shifts at the factory, Jessica often found herself under the watch of her grandmother, Agnes. If Clara was the soft quilt that shielded Jessica from cold nights, Agnes was the stone wall that taught her how to stand tall. In storms, Agnes lived only a few streets away, in a weathered little house that smelled of lavender and wood smoke. The furniture was old, the floorboards creaked with every step, but there was a warmth in those rooms that no money could have bought. To Jessica, the house felt like a world apart, a place where stories lived longer than hardship, and where wisdom hung in the air like incense. Agnes had been born in a time even harsher than Jessica could imagine. She had survived the Great Depression, 2 wars, and the loss of a husband she still spoke of with tenderness long after his death. Her hands were twisted with arthritis, but her grip was strong. Her back was bent with age, but her spirit was unshaken. She carried her scars with pride, as if they were medals earned in the long war of life. "Life doesn't owe you fairness," she told Jessica once, her voice raspy but steady. "It only gives you chances to prove who you are. You can crumble or you can endure. And the difference between the two is often just one choice." Jessica, still only a child, didn't always understand the full meaning of her grandmother's words, but she absorbed them anyway, like roots drinking in water. Evenings with Agnes were filled with lessons disguised as conversations. Sometimes they cooked together, making simple meals stretch into feasts. "Never waste," Agnes would say as she scraped every last bit of dough from the bowl. "Even the smallest crumb can matter when times are lean." Other times, Jessica sat by her grandmother's chair while Agnes told stories, not fairy tales but real ones. She spoke of neighbors who had lost everything yet still shared what little they had, of women who raised families with nothing but determination, of men broken by despair because they refused to bend. Strength, Agnes would say, isn't about how much you can lift. It's about how much you can carry in your heart without letting it poison you. Jessica listened with wide eyes, feeling the weight of those stories sink into her bones. They weren't just tales of the past, they were warnings, blueprints, and promises all at once. Agnes also noticed things others might have missed. She saw the way Jessica flinched at the mention of fathers in school lessons, the way her laughter dimmed when classmates bragged about dads teaching them to ride bikes. She never forced her granddaughter to speak of the man who had walked away, but one evening, as they sat watching the sun melt into the horizon, she placed a wrinkled hand over Jessica's. "Your father's leaving wasn't your fault," she said quietly. "Men who run from responsibility aren't strong. They're afraid. And you must never mistake their fear for your weakness." Jessica swallowed hard, her throat tight. She didn't answer, but she carried those words with her for years. They became a shield against the silent shame that abandonment had etched into her heart. If Clara gave Jessica tenderness, Agnes gave her armor. Clara taught her to believe in dignity. Agnes taught her to fight for it. Clara made her feel safe. Agnes made her feel strong. It was during those years that Jessica began to form dreams of her own. They weren't the wild fantasies of other children who longed to be stars or queens. They were quieter, steadier dreams. She dreamed of a home that was whole, of cupboards that were always full, of children who never had to wonder if love would vanish. She dreamed of creating stability where her own childhood had been marked by uncertainty. Her grandmother encouraged those dreams. "Wanting better for your future doesn't mean you're ungrateful for the present," Agnes said one night. "It means you've learned from it." Jessica nodded, her young heart swelling with resolve. She would be the one to break the cycle. She would be the one to turn lessons into change. But even as these dreams grew, so did the shadows of doubt. Sometimes, alone at night, she feared she would repeat her mother's struggles, that she would marry a man who might walk out the way her father had, leaving her to pick up the pieces. The fear of abandonment was always there, whispering that love was fragile, temporary, a thread that could snap without warning. Still, the voices of Clara and Agnes fought against that fear. Their lessons wove together like threads, creating a tapestry of resilience that Jessica wrapped around herself whenever the world felt heavy. She was still a child, but already life had shaped her into something more. She understood hardship not as a stranger, but as a teacher. She knew that strength was not born in comfort, but in scarcity. And she carried within her the quiet determination that one day she would build a life where love could thrive without fear. By the time Jessica was a teenager, the weight of her early years had already sculpted her into someone different from her peers. Where others spent afternoons gossiping about crushes or planning dances, she was thinking about bills, about groceries, about what kind of job might keep her afloat once school ended. The hunger she had witnessed, the small, invisible hunger of empty cupboards, of a mother going without, became her fire. Every test she studied for, every late shift she took cleaning houses on weekends, every dollar she tucked into the tin box beneath her bed, each one was a step toward the future she envisioned. Her dreams weren't about wealth in the grand sense. She didn't long for mansions or jewels, not even for the dresses her mother once stitched for faceless strangers. Her dream was simpler and far more urgent: stability. She imagined a kitchen, always stocked with food, a furnace that never sputtered out on winter night, a front door that stayed closed against the wind, not because it was nailed shut, but because it was sturdy and well built. She imagined tucking a child into bed, without worrying if the blanket was warm enough. And in that dream, she imagined a man beside her, a partner who wouldn't vanish at the first sign of hardship, a man whose footsteps wouldn't fade into memory like her father's had. She longed for love, but more than love, she longed for trust. A trust that could anchor her children in a way she herself had never been anchored. Sometimes she confessed these dreams to her grandmother. "I don't want riches," Jessica said once, staring at the ceiling of Agnes's little house. "I just want steady. I want safe." Agnes smiled, her eyes soft. "That's not a small dream, child. That's the biggest one of all. Because money without safety is nothing. Love without trust is nothing. Build your life on those things, and you'll never regret it." Clara, too, encouraged her daughter's vision. When Jessica showed her the tin box full of money she had saved from odd jobs, Clara kissed her forehead and whispered, "This is how it starts, little by little. Don't let anyone tell you it's impossible." But shadows lingered in Jessica's mind. Late at night, when the house was quiet and even the pipes seemed to sigh in their sleep, the old fear returned. Her father's absence was not a memory she could simply erase. It clung to her, whispering that men leave, promises break, and that she would be foolish to believe otherwise. She imagined herself older, with a child in her arms, and the fear of that child looking at her, the way she once looked at Clara, wondering why their father was gone. This fear didn't stop her from dreaming, but it made her dreams sharper, hungrier. She wanted to build not just a home, but a fortress against abandonment. Jessica carried this determination into her young adulthood. She worked jobs others turned down, studied at night, and pressed forward when exhaustion begged her to stop. Her friends sometimes teased her for being too serious, but Jessica knew better. Life had taught her that seriousness wasn't a burden, it was survival. And yet, life is rarely a straight line. For all the resolve she carried, Jessica was still human. She still longed for affection, for someone to see her not just as the daughter of Clara or the student who worked too hard, but as a woman worth loving. When she met Mark, she thought she had found that. He was charming in the way that makes people overlook cracks. His smile was quick, his compliments smooth, his presence magnetic. Jessica, with her heart aching for something steady, mistook his attention for the answer to her prayers. He told her she was beautiful, told her she deserved more than the world had given her, told her he would never leave. It was exactly what she wanted to believe. For a while, she let herself. She believed the shadow of her father's absence had finally lifted, that she had chosen differently, that she had broken the cycle. She believed that the dreams she had whispered into her grandmother's ears were about to blossom into reality. But shadows have a way of returning, and the lesson she had not yet learned was that charm without character is only another kind of hunger, one that devours rather than nourishes. Jessica thought she had escaped her father's shadow. She did not yet know that Mark would bring it back. Jessica had always believed she would recognize betrayal before it reached her. After all, she had grown up with its shadow. Her father's absence had been her first memory of it, footsteps walking out of the door, leaving behind silence. She thought she would never repeat her mother's fate, that she would never allow herself to love someone capable of leaving. But when Mark came into her life, she mistook charm for character, words for promises, and hope for truth. He had been everything her childhood self thought she wanted. Tall, confident, with that easy smile that made people forgive him before he even explained himself. Mark carried a magnetism that turned heads, and Jessica, starved for affection, found herself caught in its pull. He spoke to her in ways no one had before, telling her she was special, beautiful, worth more than the life she had been given. For a girl who had spent her youth patching holes in her shoes and learning how to ignore hunger pains, those words were intoxicating. At first, their love was a fire intense, fast-burning, consuming. He whisked her away on long drives, surprised her with flowers even when money seemed short, whispered about forever with the confidence of someone who believed the word belonged to him. Jessica, cautious at first, let herself believe. She wanted to believe. And so slowly, she lowered the wall she had built since childhood and allowed him inside. When she discovered she was pregnant, she felt fear, yes, but also joy. For the first time, she felt she was about to build the family she had always longed for, one unbroken by absence. She pictured Mark holding the child, the three of them in a small but warm home, the cycle finally broken. She rehearsed how she would tell him, imagining his smile, his arms around her, the reassurance that they were in this together. But when she finally shared the news, the scene unfolded in a way she could never have prepared for. Mark's face changed instantly. His smile evaporated, replaced by something sharp cold. He paced the room, muttering curses under his breath, as though she had confessed to a crime. "You're serious?" he asked finally, his voice edged with disbelief. Jessica nodded, her heart already sinking. "Yes, Mark, we can do this together. I know it's scary, but—" He cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Scary? Jessica, this isn't what I signed up for. I have plans. I'm not ready to be someone's father. You'll figure it out, you always do." She felt the words like a slap. Figure it out? This is our child. But Mark shook his head, his eyes darting away, already retreating into some inner distance. "No, Jess, it's your problem, not mine." And just like that, the man who had once promised forever became another shadow, his footsteps echoing in the same way her father's once had. He left before the night was over, and though she hoped for days that he might return, the silence that followed was absolute. Jessica was alone. The months that followed were some of the hardest of her life. Pregnancy is heavy, even in the best of circumstances, but alone, with little money and no support, it became a mountain she had to climb each day. Her mother, Clara, helped where she could, but her health had begun to falter. The long hours at the garment factory left her exhausted, coughing more often, her face pale with strain. Jessica tried to care for her, even as she cared for the life growing inside her. Nights were spent balancing worry upon worry, her mother's health, her child's future, her own exhaustion. And then Clara was gone. A sudden illness, a brief decline, a silence Jessica could not fill. She buried her mother with swollen ankles and an unborn child pressing against her ribs, grief layered upon grief. She had no father, no partner, no mother. Only herself and the small heartbeat within her. When Lily was born, Jessica wept. The delivery room was stark, its walls white and cold, its lights glaring. There was no one beside her to hold her hand, no one to whisper encouragement. Only nurses moving briskly, their faces kind but detached. Jessica screamed through the contractions, pushed through the pain, and then suddenly, miraculously, Lily was there. The child was small, fragile, her cry thin but fierce. Jessica held her against her chest, tears streaming down her face. She had never felt more alone, and yet never more whole. Here, in her arms, was the reason for everything. Every hunger, every heartbreak, every scar, it all led to this. She pressed her lips to her daughter's forehead and whispered, "I will never leave you." But love alone could not buy formula. Love did not pay for diapers or rent or the heat that sputtered from the furnace. Jessica soon discovered the cruel arithmetic of survival. The hospital bills drained what little she had. The landlord was patient for only so long. She looked at Lily's face, at the tiny mouth searching hungrily, and she knew she would do anything, anything to keep her safe. So she searched for work. Not glamorous work, not the kind that could make use of the education she had once hoped for. She searched for anything that would put money in her pocket quickly. And she found it at the Green Mart Supercenter. A cleaning job. Long hours, low pay, but steady. It was all she needed. Jessica told herself it was temporary, just until she could find something better. But survival rarely offers alternatives. And so she put on the uniform, tied her hair back, and stepped into the endless aisles of Green Mart with Lily in her arms and desperation in her heart. Yet there was one problem that shadowed everything: childcare. She had no one to watch Lily. Daycare was too expensive, neighbors too unreliable. Leaving her alone at home was unthinkable. And so, with the kind of ingenuity born of desperation, Jessica made a choice. She brought Lily with her. In the back of Green Mart, past the shelves of cleaning supplies and broken boxes, was a storage room rarely visited. There, Jessica fashioned a small cradle from blankets and cardboard, tucking Lily into it each morning before starting her shift. She worked 12 hours on aching feet, her hands raw from chemicals, her stomach often empty. But every break she stole, she slipped into that room, holding her baby close, feeding her what little she could afford, singing softly so the child would never feel alone. It was not perfect, it was not safe, but it was survival. And Jessica carried on day after day, clinging to the vow she had made in the delivery room. Green Mart's supercenter was a world of fluorescent light and polished aisles, a place that hummed with the constant rhythm of carts, chatter, and the shrill beep of registers. For customers, it was convenience. For Jessica, it was survival. Each morning she rose before dawn, bundling Lily in blankets, pressing a kiss against her baby's soft cheek, and whispering promises. Promises that today, like yesterday, she would make sure Lily had enough. Promises that hunger and cold would never touch her, not if Jessica could bear them instead. But Green Mart had no nursery, no safe place for infants. And so Jessica carved out her own. In the forgotten storage room, wedged between boxes of broken fixtures and shelves stacked with supplies, she built a cradle from what she could gather: old blankets, a pillow, cardboard smoothed into something resembling a bed. There, Lily slept while her mother scrubbed floors, polished glass, and emptied trash bins until her hands ached. It became their routine. Jessica worked in silence, the mop an extension of her will, her thoughts never straying far from the room in the back. She stole moments, 5 minutes here, 7 minutes there, to check on Lily, to feed her, to cradle her against her chest before returning to the endless tasks. But secrets like that are never invisible forever. Her co-workers began to notice. Not Lily herself, but the symptoms of Jessica's double life. They noticed how she refused food during breaks, how she never joined them in the cafeteria. They noticed the hollowness of her cheeks, the way she drained herself without complaint. "She's so strange," one whispered loudly enough for Jessica to hear. "Probably too poor to buy lunch," another laughed, unwrapping a sandwich. Others said she was trying to impress management, as if working yourself to the bone could ever impress people who only saw numbers on a payroll. The gossip stung, but Jessica endured it. She could endure anything as long as Lily remained hidden, safe. The supervisors weren't cruel, but they weren't kind either. They saw Jessica's efficiency, her silence, her lack of complaints, and they left her alone. In their eyes, she was reliable, invisible. That was enough. They never asked why she worked harder than anyone else. They never asked why she never sat down. And Jessica never volunteered answers, but invisibility came at a cost. The loneliness pressed against her as heavily as exhaustion. Some nights, when she walked home carrying Lily in her arms, she felt the tears slip down her cheeks before she could stop them. Still, she told herself the same thing every time. This is temporary. This is survival. One day, things will change. And yet, beneath that mantra lay fear. Every morning she carried Lily into the storage room. She knew she was taking a risk. If anyone discovered her, she could lose everything. The job, the little stability she had clawed together. And then what? The thought of Lily crying from hunger, while she had no means left to feed her, was a terror she could not face, so she prayed. Each day, she whispered to the universe for just enough invisibility to last until she could find something better. Each night, she clutched Lily tightly, breathing in the scent of her daughter's hair, as if to remind herself that all the sacrifice was worth it. But life rarely grants prayers without cost. It happened on an evening like any other. The store was quieter than usual, the hum of the lights almost louder than the footsteps on polished floors. Jessica was finishing her rounds, the mop sliding across the linoleum, when Lily's cry reached her ears. It was faint, muffled by the walls, but to a mother, it was unmistakable. Her heart clenched. She glanced around. The aisle was empty then. Quickly made her way to the back. She slipped through the corridor, her steps hurried, the paper bag of food clutched tightly in her hand. Reaching the storage room, she pushed the door open just enough to slide inside. The cries softened the moment Lily saw her. Jessica bent low, scooping her daughter into her arms, pressing her cheek against the baby's soft skin. It's okay," she whispered, rocking her gently. She pulled the small bottle she had saved from her bag and fed her, her exhaustion melting for just a moment as relief washed over her. She didn't know the door had not fully closed. She didn't know that someone else was there, at the far end of the corridor. Liam Hayes had built Greenmart from the ground up, or so people said. As CEO, his days were usually spent in boardrooms and offices, but he had always believed in seeing the ground floor for himself. On this particular evening, he had decided on an unannounced visit, walking the aisles quietly, watching how his empire moved when no one expected him. And it was there, in the forgotten corridor, that he noticed her. A cleaning woman, thin, weary, moving with a hurried tension, slipping into a storage room with a bag clutched close. Something about the way she moved caught his eye. It wasn't laziness or carelessness. It was secrecy, urgency, desperation. He paused, his hand resting in his pocket, his sharp eyes narrowing. The door closed, but not fully, leaving just a crack. And through that sliver, he heard it. The soft, unmistakable cry of a child. Liam frowned. A child? Here? In Greenmart? He stepped closer, just enough to hear the sound shift, the soothing hum of a woman's voice, the quiet rhythm of rocking, the gurgle of an infant being fed. He said nothing. He did not knock. He simply stood there, absorbing the strange truth, unraveling before him. When Jessica finally emerged, her hair falling loose from its tie, her eyes heavy with fatigue, she pulled the door closed carefully, pressing her back against it for a moment as though bracing herself. She didn't see him. She walked away quickly, the bag empty in her hand, her pace brisk. But Liam Hayes had seen enough. The CEO who dealt in profits and logistics now found himself staring into a mystery that numbers could not explain. A woman hiding a child in a storage room. And though Jessica thought her secret was still safe, it was in that moment her world began to change. When Jessica finished her shift that evening, she thought she had managed another day without discovery. She had cleaned the aisles, swept the floors, polished the glass, all the while ducking into the storage room when she could to check on Lily. It was their routine, their secret, and though every moment carried fear, she told herself she was careful enough, but secrets have a way of finding cracks. The next morning, she arrived early, carrying Lily against her chest in a sling before sneaking her once again into the storage room. She checked the blankets, whispered soft reassurances, then slipped out to begin her work. By noon, her hands already stung from the harsh chemicals, but she pushed through as always. That was when he appeared. Liam Hayes did not belong to the world of mops and brooms. He belonged to the world above, the one of glass offices and sharp suits, of meetings with investors and signatures that changed lives with the stroke of a pen. Jessica knew his name the way every employee did, but she never imagined he would know hers. Yet there he was, standing in the aisle, watching her as she wiped down a row of freezer doors. She froze, the rag slipping slightly in her hand. His presence was magnetic, steady, unnerving. He carried himself like a man used to answers, used to authority, but there was no cruelty in his eyes. Only curiosity. You've been working hard, he said, his voice calm but cutting through the hum of the store. Jessica swallowed, unsure whether to respond. Just doing my job, sir. He nodded slowly, but his gaze did not move away. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her with unnerving focus. Last night, he continued, I saw you enter the storage room. Her chest tightened, her breath caught. For a moment, she thought she might faint. The storage room? She echoed, her voice trembling. Yes, he said simply. You weren't alone, were you? Panic surged through her veins. She felt exposed, as if every wall she had built, every secret she had guarded, had been stripped away in a single sentence. Her mind raced with consequences, termination. Homelessness, Lily taken from her. The walls of Green Mart, which had been her fragile sanctuary, now felt like a trap. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, gripping the rag so tightly her knuckles turned white. Liam's eyes softened, though his expression remained unreadable. Jessica, he said, using her name for the first time. I'm not here to punish you, I just want to understand. Hearing her name from his lips startled her more than the accusation. Few people in this place bothered to know it. To them, she was just the cleaner, invisible, useful, replaceable. But he spoke it as though it mattered. Still, she shook her head, stepping back, putting space between them. Please, she whispered, her voice raw. Don't take this from me. This job is all I have. If you fire me, I'm not firing you, he interrupted gently. Her eyes filled with tears, she tried desperately to blink away. Then why are you asking? Why are you following me? Whatever you think you saw, please, just forget it. But Liam didn't move, didn't relent. Instead, he studied her like a man searching for answers in places long overlooked. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a quiet intensity that made her chest ache. You're hiding something, he said softly. But not for yourself, for someone else. Jessica turned away, unable to meet his eyes. She wanted to scream, to beg him to leave her alone, to stop peeling away the fragile armor she wore each day. But Lily's face flashed in her mind her small hands, her soft breath in the dark storage room, and Jessica's silence became its own confession. Liam did not press further. He simply said, I won't tell anyone, not until you're ready to explain. Then he walked away, his footsteps steady, leaving her trembling in the aisle, her rag slipping forgotten to the floor. That night, Jessica sat awake long after Lily had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling of their small apartment. Fear coiled in her stomach. Why hadn't he reported her? Why hadn't he told the supervisors or worse, the authorities? What did he want? She thought of men and their promises, her father's silence, Mark's betrayal, all the ways words had failed her. Liam's quiet compassion frightened her more than anger ever could. Because anger she understood. Compassion felt like a trap. The next day, he appeared again. Not looming, not demanding, simply present. He walked the aisles while she worked, spoke briefly with supervisors, and then, inevitably, found her. You're tired, he observed. Jessica bristled. Everyone here is tired. But not like you, he replied. She set her jaw. If you're here to pity me, I don't need pity. I need this job. His eyes lingered on her, steady, searching. But instead of arguing, he simply said, I understand. And then he left again, as quietly as he had come. His presence unsettled her. He wasn't angry, wasn't cruel, wasn't threatening her survival. Instead, he was watching, waiting, offering something she did not trust. Patience. And Jessica, hardened by loss and abandonment, refused to believe in patience. Greenmark was not kind to secrets. Whispers traveled faster than carts rolling down the aisles, and soon Jessica found herself at the center of gossip she hadn't invited. She sneaks off all the time, one coworker said in the break room, her voice dripping with suspicion. Probably stealing, another replied. She looks desperate enough. They never imagined the truth, that she was slipping away not for theft, but to cradle her child. Yet the whispers clung to her like dust, making her already difficult days heavier. She kept her head down, worked harder, scrubbed floors until her knees ached. But no matter how invisible she tried to be, eyes followed her, narrowing with speculation. The gossip didn't escape Liam's notice either. He overheard it when he visited, watching the way other employees spoke about Jessica with the casual cruelty of those who had never carried more than their own hunger. It disturbed him not only because it revealed the smallness of their hearts, but because it told him just how vulnerable Jessica was. Jessica, meanwhile, fought to ignore it all. But her body betrayed her. Weeks of skipped meals, stolen naps, and 12-hour shifts left her pale, her hands trembling as she worked. She pressed on anyway, clinging to the thought that if she faltered, Lily would pay the price. Then, like a shadow returning from the past, Mark appeared. It was a Saturday afternoon, the store buzzing with weekend shoppers, when Jessica saw him leaning against the wall near the entrance. The sight of him froze her mid-step, the mop slipping from her hand. He looked the same charming smile, confident stance, but his eyes were sharper, calculating. "Jessica," he drawled, stepping forward. "Long time no see." She gripped the mop handle, her voice tight. "What are you doing here?" He smirked. "Came to see my daughter." The words made her stomach twist. "You don't have a daughter." "You walked away." Mark's smile widened. "Maybe, but the law doesn't see it that way. I could make things very complicated for you." Fear stabbed through her chest. She pulled him aside, out of earshot, her voice trembling. "Don't. You dare. You left us. You don't get to show up now and, I want money," he interrupted, his tone turning hard. "You've got a job. You've got that rich company behind you. Give me what I ask or I'll go to court and demand custody." Jessica's blood ran cold. "You wouldn't." He leaned close, his breath sour. "Watch me." And then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd as swiftly as he had come, leaving Jessica shaken, clutching the mop handle like a weapon she couldn't use. That night, she sat by Lily's crib, her body trembling. How could she fight him? How could she keep her daughter safe when she had so little to offer, when the world seemed to tilt always against her? Her heart ached with terror, but she forced herself to keep breathing, to keep going. In the days that followed, exhaustion deepened. Her skin grew pale, her steps slower. Supervisors frowned at her sluggishness, but she forced herself onward, determined not to draw more suspicion. She told no one of Mark's threats. But Liam noticed. He watched her one evening as she scrubbed the same corner twice, her rag slipping from fingers that no longer had strength. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so no one else could hear. "Jessica, you're unwell. You need rest." She shook her head, refusing to look at him. "I can't afford rest." "Then let me help," he said. Her chest tightened. "No, you'll break yourself if you keep this up." Her eyes flashed, weary but fierce. "Better me than her." Liam's throat tightened at the words. He saw it now, the toll of a woman carrying the world on her shoulders, refusing to collapse because a child depended on her. He wanted to tell her she didn't have to do it alone. He wanted to offer her more than pity. But Jessica had been burned by promises before, and she recoiled from his compassion, as though it were fire. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't. Act like you care. Men always say they care. And then they leave." Her words cut deeper than she knew. For a long moment, Liam stood in silence, the hum of the store around them fading into nothing. Then, softly, almost like a confession to himself, he said, "Jessica, you remind me of someone I once lost." Her breath caught. She looked at him then, truly looked, and saw for the first time not just the polished CEO, but a man carrying his own ghosts. His eyes held sorrow, old and raw, a wound time had not closed. The words lingered between them, heavy with meaning neither dared to unpack. And in that moment, Jessica realized her struggle had just crossed into something larger, something she didn't yet understand. Liam Hayes carried his past like a scar beneath an expensive suit, hidden from most, but never healed. To the world, he was the CEO who had built Greenmart into a giant, a man whose decisions shaped thousands of lives, whose net worth was discussed in business magazines. But no article ever mentioned the truth, that his empire had been built not only on ambition, but also on grief. Years ago, when Greenmart was still small enough that Liam himself stocked shelves on occasion, he had been married. Ellen was her name. She was the kind of woman who lit up ordinary moments, a laugh in the kitchen, a hand on his arm during long nights of planning, a whispered word of encouragement when he doubted himself. They had dreamed together of a family, a life not consumed by business alone. And for a brief moment, it seemed those dreams were within reach. Ellen became pregnant, and Liam had felt as though the universe was finally balancing the scales. A child, their child. He had imagined holding the baby, watching Ellen's face glow with motherhood, building not just a company, but a home filled with laughter. But fate is rarely so kind. Complications came swiftly, a night of panic in hospital corridors, of doctors speaking in urgent tones he could barely follow. Hours later, Liam stood in a sterile room, numb with shock. Ellen was gone, and with her, the child who had never taken a breath. The grief hollowed him. He poured himself into work, because it was the only thing left that didn't dissolve when he touched it. The company grew, expanded, conquered markets, but none of it filled the emptiness in his chest. He became a man defined by power, yes, but haunted by absence. It was that absence that stirred the first time he noticed Jessica. Not simply her labor, though she worked harder than anyone else, but the look in her eyes. Exhaustion laced with defiance, fear laced with love. She reminded him of Ellen in ways he could not articulate, the quiet strength, the willingness to endure any hardship for the sake of another. And when he realized she was hiding a child, the ache inside him deepened. A child she protected so fiercely that she starved herself, hid her secret from the world, carried the weight of 2 lives without complaint. For the first time in years, Liam felt something other than detachment. Empathy, recognition, perhaps even the faint stirrings of redemption. And so he acted not boldly, but quietly. He called in the head of scheduling and adjusted her hours so she wouldn't face the cruelest shifts. He told supervisors to judge her work by results, not by her absences, buying her cover when she slipped away to the storage room. He contacted a local daycare Greenmart had once funded, ensuring Jessica's name appeared on the list for subsidized childcare, though she didn't yet know it. He even made sure her pay was never docked for the minutes she vanished, an anomaly no one dared question when it came from the top. Jessica noticed, of course. She wasn't naive. One day she confronted her supervisor, suspicion sharp in her voice. "Why am I suddenly starting later?" the woman shrugged. "Orders from above." Jessica's chest tightened. Above. There was only one man above. Later, she found Liam near the front office, speaking briefly to a regional manager. When he noticed her, his gaze softened. She stepped forward, her mop still in her hand like a shield. "Was this you?" she asked, her tone guarded. He didn't pretend. "Yes, why?" Her voice shook. "Why interfere? Why notice me at all?" "You needed it," he said simply. "I didn't ask for it. You didn't have to." Jessica clenched her jaw, her heart pounding. "Don't do this. Don't act like you care. I can't afford favors. They always come with strings." Liam held her gaze, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "Not everything comes with a price tag, Jessica." The words unsettled her more than threats ever could. She turned away quickly, muttering, "I've heard that before." That night, Lying in her cramped apartment with Lily curled beside her, Jessica couldn't shake the conversation. Men had made promises before her father with his vows to be back soon, Mark with his honeyed talk of forever, and each had left scars. Liam's quiet interventions, his refusal to explain himself beyond simple acts of mercy, felt dangerous precisely because they seemed genuine. She didn't know whether to be grateful or afraid, but she noticed the difference. For the first time in months, she could breathe a little easier in the mornings. She could steal an extra half-hour of rest before work. Supervisors stopped glaring when she slipped away for 5 minutes. It didn't erase her struggle, but it softened the edges of survival. Still, she told herself not to trust it. Because trust was the first step to heartbreak, and she couldn't afford more of that. Not when Lily depended on her strength. And yet, across Greenmart's polished floors, Liam continued to watch. Not with judgment, not with pity, but with the silent recognition of a man who had once lost everything, and who now saw in Jessica and her daughter something he couldn't look away from. The small mercies Liam quietly arranged did not go unnoticed by others. Employees who once barely spared Jessica a glance now eyed her with suspicion. Whispers spread in break rooms and storage halls, carried on the same voices that had mocked her before. "She's got special treatment," one woman muttered, arms crossed. "Probably cozying up to management," another sneered. Women, like her, always find a way to crawl higher. Jessica heard the gossip, but never confronted it. To argue would be to draw attention, and attention was the last thing she could afford. Instead, she buried herself in work, her silence feeding the rumors. Yet each whisper gnawed at her already fragile dignity, eroding the little peace Liam's interventions had bought her. The cruelest twist came when Mark returned, slinking back into her world like a shadow she had prayed would never find her. Again, he appeared outside her building one night, leaning against a streetlight, his smile sharp with arrogance. Jessica froze, clutching Lily tighter in her arms as she approached. "Nice little setup you've got," he said smoothly. "Job, a roof, a kid that doesn't look half-starved. Guess you've been managing without me." Jessica glared. "Stay away from us." Mark chuckled, shaking his head. "Us, you mean?" "My daughter." "Don't forget, Jess. No matter what story you tell yourself, she's mine too. And if I decide to walk into a courtroom, the law might just agree." The threat made her stomach churn. "You left us. You don't get to come back when it suits you." "Maybe not," he replied, his smile widening. "But money changes things. Give me what I ask regularly, or I make trouble. Your boss won't want an employee with custody battles hanging over her. Might even get your little secret exposed." Jessica's blood ran cold. How did he know? Mark leaned closer, his breath heavy with the stench of cigarettes. "People talk, Jess. Your coworkers, for example. Not everyone thinks you're as invisible as you hope. A few of them might be willing to help me, especially if they get something out of it. Imagine management finding out you've been hiding a baby on company property. What then?" He left her shaking on the steps, Lily fussing softly against her chest. In the days that followed, Jessica lived in constant fear. She kept glancing over her shoulder at work, flinching whenever a door opened, convinced Mark would appear at any moment. The whispers from coworkers grew louder, sharper, like knives thrown at her back. Some seemed eager to believe the worst about her, and she could feel their eyes following when she slipped into the storage room. And through it all, Liam lingered in the background. Not intrusive, never demanding, but present, watching, waiting. Sometimes he spoke an observation about her exhaustion, a quiet assurance that her job was safe, but his calmness unsettled her as much as it soothed. She wondered constantly, why? Why would a man like him care about someone like me? One evening, she confronted him. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice low, trembling with exhaustion and suspicion. "Do what?" "Whatever this is," she snapped, gesturing toward the schedule pinned on the wall, the leniency she knew came from him. "Helping me, protecting me. I don't know if this is pity, charity, or something else, but I don't want it." Liam's eyes softened, though his jaw tightened. "It's not pity, and it's not charity. Then what?" she demanded. He hesitated, as though weighing words too heavy to say aloud. Finally, he shook his head. "One day, maybe I'll tell you. But not tonight." Jessica walked away, unsettled. Part of her longed to believe him. Another part braced for the inevitable collapse, the moment he too would vanish and leave her holding everything alone. But fate gave her no time to untangle his intentions, because Mark wasn't finished. 3 days later, he stormed into Greenmart. It was the middle of a busy afternoon, carts rattling, children crying, announcements crackling over the intercom. Jessica was bent over a mop in aisle 5 when she heard the commotion at the front doors. Mark's voice rang out, loud and commanding. "I want to see my daughter." Jessica's blood froze. She turned, her heart hammering, as customers and employees alike stopped to stare. Mark pushed past the greeter, his face twisted with a dangerous smile. "Jessica Harris," he called. "Bring me Lily. She's mine too, and I won't be kept from her." Gasps rippled through the store. Whispers rose like a tide. Jessica stood rooted in place, the mop slipping from her hands, terror clawing up her throat. And at the far end of the aisle, Liam Hayes appeared, his expression dark. His eyes locked on Mark. The fragile balance of Jessica's hidden world was about to shatter. The storm began with a voice. "I want my daughter." Mark's words cracked across the air like lightning. The Greenmart Supercenter, usually a symphony of hums and chatter, fell into sudden silence. Cashiers froze mid-scan. Customers paused with carts half full of groceries. Employees looked up from their stations with wide eyes. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to tilt toward the man storming through the automatic doors. Jessica, bent over her mop in aisle 5, felt the sound lodge itself in her chest like a blade. Her body stiffened, her hand slipping from the handle. She didn't need to look to know the voice. That drawl, that arrogance, it was Mark. The mop clattered against the tiles, and heads turned toward her. Whispers began. She stood paralyzed, her heart thundering in her ears, and then he was there. Mark moved quickly, his boots heavy against the polished floor. He wore the same smirk she remembered, the one that once charmed her, the one that now looked twisted, poisonous. "There you are," he called, his voice carrying down the aisle. "Thought you could hide from me. Thought you could hide her from me." Jessica's breath caught. For months she had lived with the fear of this moment, of her fragile secret, being dragged into the light. Her throat went dry, her body trembling, but something inside her pushed back against the tide of fear. She straightened. "You don't belong here, Mark," she said, her voice shaking but firm enough to echo. The crowd stirred, customers clutching their carts, employees whispering. Jessica, the quiet cleaner, was speaking with a fire none of them had ever seen. Mark sneered, stepping closer. "Dog eye? She's mine too. The law says a father stays." Jessica cut him off. "The law says a father provides. You did neither. You left us before Lily was even born. You don't get to stand here and pretend she's yours." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Some employees exchanged glances, suddenly ashamed of the gossip they'd whispered about Jessica for months. Mark's jaw tightened. He moved closer, his voice rising. "You think you can just erase me? You think you can tell me she isn't mine? I'll take you to court if I have to." Jessica's knees shook, but she held her ground. For too long she had been silent, swallowing her pain, hiding her truth in dark storage rooms. Not anymore. "You'll never take her," she said, louder this time. "Because you don't know her. You've never held her, never fed her, never even tried." She doesn't know your face, Mark. She only knows mine. The words hit like a strike, and for the first time, Mark faltered. And then came another voice. Low, steady, cutting through the chaos. Enough. Liam. He stepped into view at the end of the aisle, tall and composed in his dark suit, his presence immediately commanding attention. The crowd parted instinctively, eyes snapping to him. Employees whispered his name, the CEO they rarely saw in person. He walked forward slowly, his eyes locked on Mark, his expression calm but edged with steel. You've made enough noise, Liam said, his tone quiet but carrying. Jessica doesn't owe you a stage, and she doesn't owe you a child you abandoned. Mark laughed bitterly, though his bravado wavered. And who are you? Her boss? Her savior? What gives you the right to step into this? Liam didn't blink. The right comes from truth. And the truth is, you left. You didn't provide. You didn't protect. You forfeited your right the moment you walked away. The crowd murmured again, nods of agreement passing through the aisle. Jessica stared at Liam, stunned not by his words alone, but by the certainty with which he spoke, as though her truth was his to defend. Mark scoffed, trying to recover. You think money makes you the hero here? You think you can just buy your way into her life? No, Liam said firmly, his voice steady as stone. Because some things can't be bought. Family isn't one of them. Jessica has given everything she has, her health, her time, her pride, to make sure Lily never went without. That's what it means to be a parent, not biology, not paperwork, choice. And you, he stepped closer, his eyes narrowing, you chose to walk away. The silence after his words was thick, electric. Even the hum of the store's lights seemed to dim. Mark opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, his charm failed him. His face reddened, his fists clenched, but his voice cracked when he spoke. You think you know me? You don't. She's mine, and I'll prove it. Jessica took a step forward then, her voice rising above the crowd, clear and unshakable. She's not yours, Mark. She's mine. She has always been mine. And no threats, no lies, no shouting will ever change that. Her words rang like a verdict. The crowd erupted into murmurs, supportive now, not mocking. Strangers nodded. Employees stared with wide eyes. For the first time, Jessica wasn't just the quiet cleaner. She was a mother standing in the full light of her strength. Liam turned to her, his expression unreadable but his eyes filled with something that made her heart tremble. Respect, recognition, perhaps even admiration. Mark, trembling with rage, spat a final threat. This isn't over. And he stormed out, leaving the store buzzing with whispers, every eye on Jessica and the man who had stood beside her. But deep down, Jessica knew this was only the beginning. The storm Mark left behind lingered long after he slammed through the green marked doors. Whispers swirled among employees for days. Some marveled at Jessica's defiance. Others speculated about Liam's unexpected intervention. But for Jessica, the silence after was heavier than the shouting had been. She knew Mark wasn't finished. His threats weren't empty. And sure enough, a week later, a letter arrived, official, stamped, cold. Mark had filed for custody. Jessica sat at her kitchen table with Lily in her lap, the paper trembling in her hands. Fear washed over her in waves. She had no lawyer, no money, no way to fight a man who knew how to twist lies into leverage. For hours she sat frozen, until a knock broke the silence. Liam. He stood at her door, not in a suit this time, but in a simple shirt, his expression softened. I heard, he said quietly, holding out a folder. And I came prepared. Jessica's voice cracked. Why? Why are you doing this for me? He didn't hesitate. Because you shouldn't have to fight this alone. And because he's unfit. I have evidence, his debts, his arrests, his history of abandonment. With the right support, he doesn't stand a chance. Her hands shook as she stared at him. I can't pay you back. I'm not asking for payment, Liam said. I'm asking you to let me help. Jessica wanted to resist, to push him away, but the memory of Mark's sneer, his threats, the paper on her table, all of it pressed her into silence. She nodded slowly. For Lily, she whispered. The hearing was set in a small courtroom, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the air thick with tension. Jessica sat on one side, clutching Lily's hand, her heart hammering. Across the aisle, Mark lounged with false confidence, smirking, as though victory were certain. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Mark's lawyer spoke first, painting him as a father eager to reconnect, claiming Jessica had unfairly denied him access to his child. Jessica's stomach twisted with rage, but she stayed quiet, her hands trembling. Then Liam's voice filled the room. He wasn't acting as her lawyer, he had hired one for her, but he stood as a witness, his calm authority commanding attention. Your Honor, he began, this is not a case of a father seeking connection. This is a man who abandoned his partner during pregnancy, who disappeared when responsibility demanded sacrifice. I have records of his debts, his evictions, his arrests. I have testimony from neighbors who confirm he offered no support, financial or otherwise. The judge flipped through the documents Liam had gathered, his brow furrowing. Mark shifted uneasily in his chair, his smirk faltering. Then Jessica rose. Her knees shook, but her voice was steady. He was gone when she was born, she said, her words breaking the stillness. I held her alone. I fed her alone. I worked through exhaustion, through hunger, to keep her safe. She doesn't know him. She only knows me. And I will never let him use her as leverage for money or power. Lily deserves love, not threats. Her words, simple but raw, silenced even the whispers in the courtroom. The judge leaned back, his gavel tapping lightly. The evidence is clear. Custody remains solely with the mother. The father has forfeited his rights through abandonment and negligence. Case closed. The gavel struck, final and sharp. Jessica exhaled a sob, clutching Lily to her chest. Relief crashed over her like a tide, heavy and cleansing. Across the aisle, Mark erupted, his voice rising in protest, but the bailiff's firm hand on his shoulder silenced him. For once, he had no power left. Later, outside the courtroom, Jessica turned to Liam. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. But you did. Not to control me, not to pity me, but to stand with me. Liam's eyes softened. That's what family does. It stands, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Her throat tightened. For years she had braced herself for abandonment, for promises that broke like glass. But here stood a man who had not left, who had fought beside her not to own her life, but to protect it. He reached into his pocket, not for a grand gesture, not for a ring glittering with wealth, but for something small. A simple band, unadorned. He held it gently, his voice low. I'm not offering riches, he said. You've survived without them. I'm offering steadiness. A home where Lily will never doubt love. A life where you won't have to fight alone. Marry me, Jessica. Not for appearances, not for Greenmart, not for the world. For us, for her. Tears filled Jessica's eyes. She looked at Lily, her daughter's small hand gripping hers, her wide, innocent eyes watching. Jessica bent, pressing a kiss to Lily's forehead, then lifted her gaze back to Liam. Not for me, she whispered, her voice trembling but sure. But for Lily too. And with those words, she accepted not just the ring, but the promise of a life no longer defined by fear, by hunger, by abandonment. A promise of family. The church was not grand, not gilded with chandeliers or marble. It was small, warm, the kind of place where wood creaked underfoot and sunlight poured in through stained glass windows that had been there for generations. Jessica had passed it countless times on her way to and from Greenmart, never imagining She would one day stand at its altar. And yet, on this day, the worn pews were filled with faces she had once feared, faces that had once looked at her with judgment, and now looked upon her with something else entirely. Her wedding was not a spectacle. There were no ivory carriages, no glittering banquets, no headlines announcing her name. Instead, there were modest flowers, arranged by the hands of Green Mart employees who had once whispered about her but had come to admire her strength. There was music played by a local quartet, soft and imperfect, but filled with heart. There were children fidgeting in their seats, giggling until hushed by smiling parents. At the center of it all stood Jessica, in a simple white dress sewn by one of her mother's old friends. It wasn't expensive, but it was hers, and it fit her not just in size but in spirit. She held a bouquet of daisies and Lily chosen because Lily had pointed to them at the florist and said, "Mama, those are happy flowers." The aisle stretched before her, short but infinite in its meaning. Each step carried the weight of her past, the hunger she had endured, the whispers she had survived, the storage room where she once hid her child. Each step reminded her that she was no longer alone. At the altar stood Liam. He wore a suit, but not the kind that declared wealth. It was modest, almost understated, as though he wanted the day to belong entirely to her. His eyes met hers, steady and warm, and she saw in them not pity, not control, but partnership. The ceremony began. The officiant spoke of love not as firework or spectacle, but as choice daily, deliberate, enduring. Jessica's chest tightened with every word, for she knew what choice meant. She had lived it. She had chosen to work through hunger so Lily could eat, chosen to endure judgment so Lily could sleep safely, chosen to fight when fear told her to surrender. And now she chose this man, not because he had saved her, but because he had stood beside her when saving herself was all she knew how to do. When it was her turn to speak, Jessica's voice trembled, but not with fear. "I never thought I'd be here," she said softly, her gaze sweeping across the gathered faces. "I thought my life would be about surviving, about keeping my daughter safe, no matter what it cost me. I didn't believe in miracles anymore. But then I realized miracles don't always arrive with noise. Sometimes they're quiet. Sometimes they look like someone noticing what the world ignored." She looked at Liam, tears shimmering. "And for that I say yes, not just for me, but for Lily too." There were tears in the crowd. Even the employees who had once mocked her now dabbed at their eyes, humbled by the transformation of a woman they had underestimated. And then came Lily, the little girl, once hidden in shadows, now walked proudly down the aisle as flower girl. She scattered petals with clumsy joy, her small face alight with wonder. The crowd smiled, watching her as though she were the truest symbol of the day. Once a secret cradled in a storage room, she now walked in sunlight, her steps strong and free. When Liam slipped the ring onto Jessica's finger, it was not a promise wrapped in diamonds or excess. It was a simple band, unadorned, but heavy with meaning. It symbolized not wealth, but steadiness. Not control, but partnership. Not rescue, but shared strength. And when the officiant declared them husband and wife, the cheer that rose from the pews was not polite applause. It was loud, heartfelt, rising from people who had witnessed her journey firsthand. It was celebration not just of a union, but of survival, of resilience, of triumph. Jessica kissed Liam, her hands trembling in his, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight she carried lighten. The wedding was simple, but in its simplicity, it was profound. It was not a spectacle to the world, it was a victory. For the people who mattered most, Jessica, Liam, and Lily, the reception after the ceremony was held in the church hall, a modest space filled with folding chairs and tables covered in white cloths. The food was simple homemade casseroles, fresh bread, fruit salads donated by neighbors, a cake baked by one of the cashiers who once rolled her eyes at Jessica's long hours. It wasn't luxury, but it was abundance. For Jessica, it was the kind of abundance she had dreamed of as a child. People gathered, laughter spilling across the room, plates full, bellies full, hearts full. She sat for a moment at a corner table, her hand brushing the band on her finger. The weight of it was light, almost as though it were simply an extension of her hand. But the meaning, it was heavier than anything she had ever carried. Lily darted between tables, her dress slightly crooked, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She ran to Jessica with a fistful of petals still clutched from her walk down the aisle. "Mama, look. I still have some left." Jessica laughed, pulling her daughter close. "You did perfect," she whispered, kissing her forehead. As Lily bounded away again, Jessica let her gaze sweep across the room. The faces she saw stunned her. Months ago, many of these same co-workers had whispered behind her back, mocking her hunger, calling her strange. And now here they were, clapping her on the shoulder, bringing gifts wrapped in newspaper, hugging her as though she had always belonged. She realized something then. It wasn't just her life that had changed. She had changed theirs too. People had watched her endure when they thought endurance impossible. They had seen her love when love seemed too costly, and it had shifted something in them. Her story had become a mirror, forcing them to examine their own lives, their own choices. As the noise of laughter and clinking cups swirled around her, Jessica let herself sink into thought. For years I thought love was a promise too fragile to trust. I thought survival was my only purpose. I told myself that stability was the highest dream I could afford. And maybe, at the time, that was true. Her hand slid over the table to touch Liam's. He met her gaze, his eyes steady, his thumb brushing across her knuckles with a gentleness that made her heart ache. But love found me when I had stopped expecting it. Not in grand gestures, not in perfect men with perfect words. It found me in compassion disguised as curiosity, in patience where I expected abandonment, in steadiness where I feared collapse. It found me when I was still hiding my child in the shadows, when I was still bracing for hunger and whispers. And because of that, I believe in it now. I believe in us. Jessica's eyes fell on Lily again, the little girl laughing with two other children, her voice carrying above the noise. A rush of memory hit her. Lily swaddled in blankets in a storage room, her tiny cries muffled by cardboard walls. Jessica's own stomach empty so her baby could eat. The contrast nearly stole her breath. Once, Lily had been a secret shamefully hidden from the world. Now she was the brightest part of it. Jessica's chest tightened, her eyes welling with tears. She thought of her mother, Clara, who had taught her dignity in poverty. She thought of Agnes, her grandmother, who had taught her that endurance mattered more than ease. She wished they could see her now, wished they could see Lily scattering petals down an aisle instead of lying unseen in a storage room. She leaned her head against Liam's shoulder, whispering softly so only he could hear. "They'd be proud, you know." He didn't ask who. He simply nodded, his hand tightening around hers. "So am I." Jessica closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the moment seep into her bones. The world had once felt so cold, so unforgiving. And yet here she was married, surrounded, celebrated. Not because she had chased miracles, but because she had kept walking when the ground beneath her threatened to give way. She thought of all the times she had whispered to herself that she couldn't go on, and yet each time she had. Not for herself, but for Lily. And now, because she had endured, she had been given something she had never thought she would find. Love that didn't demand. Love that didn't abandon. Love that chose to stay. That was the miracle. Not thunder, not lightning, not wealth or spectacle. Just resilience, just love. Just the quiet partnership of two people carrying weight together instead of alone. Jessica smiled as Lily ran back to her, climbing into her lap, her small arms wrapping tightly around her. "Mama," Lily whispered, her voice thick with sleepiness after the long day. We're a family now, right? Jessica's eyes filled. She kissed her daughter's hair, breathing in the scent of daisies and cake. Yes, sweetheart. We're a family. And for the first time in her life, she truly believed it. The day after the wedding, the air was cool and quiet, carrying the scent of autumn leaves. Jessica rose early, her white dress now folded away, her bouquet already beginning to wilt on the kitchen table. The house was still, save for Lily's soft humming as she played with the leftover petals from her basket. There was one place Jessica knew she needed to go. Hand in hand, she and Liam walked with Lily to the cemetery just outside town. It wasn't far, but the walk felt heavy, each step bringing with it memories of the women who had shaped her life: Clara, her mother, and Agnes, her grandmother. They had both been the foundation of her strength, and though they weren't here to see this new beginning, Jessica carried them in every breath. They reached the modest headstone, Clara Harris, a beloved mother. Jessica knelt, her knees pressing into the cool earth, and laid her bouquet gently against the stone. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Words tangled in her chest, pressed there by years of longing. Finally she whispered, "We made it, Mama." Lily leaned close, her small hand resting on the stone as if she too wanted to be part of the moment. "Hi, Grandma," she said in her soft voice, innocent yet steady. "I was the flower girl yesterday." Jessica laughed through her tears, pulling her daughter into her arms. Liam placed a hand on Jessica's shoulder, silent, steady. He didn't intrude with words, he simply stood beside her, the way he always had. Jessica lifted her gaze to the sky, the trees swaying gently overhead. "I thought love had left me, Mama. I thought survival was all I had left. But you were right. Dignity matters. Resilience matters." And love, when it finally came, wasn't about promises or gifts. It was about presence, about someone choosing to stay. They lingered there for a while, the three of them together, the past and present mingling in quiet reverence. When they finally left, Jessica felt lighter, as though a blessing had been laid across her shoulders. That evening, back at home, Jessica sat by the window with Lily curled on her lap. Outside, the sun slipped below the horizon, the first stars appearing faintly in the sky. Liam was in the kitchen, his movements quiet as he prepared tea. For the first time in years, Jessica felt no need to brace herself for the next hardship. Lily stirred, her small voice breaking the silence. "Mama, when I was a baby, did you always stay with me?" Jessica kissed her hair. "Always. Even when I was working, I was thinking of you. Every lunch I didn't eat, every break I skipped it, was for you." Lily yawned, her eyes half closed. "That's why I'm your flower." Huh. Jessica's heart tightened. She brushed her daughter's cheek, whispering, "Yes, sweetheart. You're my flower. You're the proof that even in the darkest places, something beautiful can grow." Later, after Lily had fallen asleep, Jessica sat quietly beside Liam. The house was hushed, filled only with the sound of the wind outside. She thought of the long journey that had brought her here, the storage room, the whispers, the loneliness, the threats. And then she thought of the wedding, the reception, Lily scattering petals down the aisle, the way the community had come together not to mock, but to celebrate. It struck her that life's miracles weren't always grand. They weren't always wrapped in thunder or spectacle. Sometimes they were as small as a skipped lunch. Sometimes they were as fragile as a child's laughter in a back room. And sometimes they were as steady as a man who saw worth where the world had looked away. In the quiet that followed, the old man's voice lingered, the voice that had carried this story from the beginning. Sometimes miracles aren't made of lightning or thunder. Sometimes they are as quiet as a mother skipping lunch, and a man seeing her worth before the world ever did. And with that, the story closed not in noise but in silence, like the glow of a candle at the end of a long night, soft, steady, and unbroken.